The frozen wind tore through the canyon like a knife through fabric, and Natalie Fletcher knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone in this wagon with her baby still trapped inside her body. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 3 days now, frozen solid in the driver's seat before she had managed to push his corpse off onto the snow-covered ground somewhere back along the trail. The influenza had taken him fast. So fast she barely had time to understand what was happening before his lips turned blue and his chest stopped rising. Now here she was, 23 years old and 9 months pregnant, stranded in a blizzard somewhere between Santa Fe and Las Lunas, New Mexico, in the brutal winter of 1881. The contractions had started at dawn, and now, as the pale winter sun struggled to break through the snow clouds, Natalie knew the baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Her water had broken an hour ago, soaking through her already damp skirts, and the pain was like nothing she had ever imagined. She had helped her mother deliver her younger siblings back in Missouri, but being the one giving birth was entirely different. Every muscle in her body seemed to be tearing itself apart. "Please," she whispered to no one, to God, to the howling wind. "Please, somebody help me." But there was no one. They had been traveling alone, Thomas insisting they could make it to his brother's ranch before the winter storms hit. They had been wrong. So terribly, fatally wrong. Natalie braced herself against the side of the wagon as another contraction ripped through her. She could feel the baby moving down, could feel her body opening despite her terror. She had no choice but to do this. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not, whether Thomas was here or not, whether she survived or not. She pulled up her skirts with shaking hands, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. Everything was numb from the cold anyway. She could barely feel her fingers as she tried to position herself, tried to remember everything her mother had told her about bringing babies into the world. Push when your body tells you to push. Breathe between contractions. Pray that everything goes right, because so many things can go wrong. The next contraction came harder than all the others, and Natalie felt a scream tear from her throat that she could not contain. It echoed through the wagon, through the canyon, mixing with the sound of the wind. She pushed because her body gave her no choice, pushed until she thought she might die from the effort, and then she felt it. The baby's head, crowning, burning, stretching her impossibly wide. "Oh God," she sobbed, reaching down with frozen fingers to feel the small, wet head. The baby was coming. Her baby was actually coming. She pushed again with the next contraction, and suddenly the head was out, then the shoulders, and then in a rush of fluid and blood, the entire tiny body slipped into her waiting hands. Natalie pulled the baby up to her chest, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and cold and relief. The baby was silent, too silent. "No, no, no," Natalie whispered, rubbing the tiny chest with her palm, trying to remember what her mother had done when her youngest brother had come out quiet like this. She rubbed harder, tilted the baby's head down to clear the airway, and then finally, mercifully, the baby let out a thin wail that was the most beautiful sound Natalie had ever heard. That's it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she pulled the baby close to her chest, trying to share what little warmth she had left. She could not tell if it was a boy or girl yet, was too busy trying to keep the infant warm, trying to figure out what to do about the cord that still connected them. Her mind felt foggy from exhaustion and cold. She needed to cut the cord, needed to tie it off first so they would not both bleed to death. She fumbled in Thomas's supply box with one hand while keeping the baby pressed against her chest with the other. There was twine and his knife. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip either one. It took her 3 tries to tie the cord off in 2 places like she had seen her mother do. Then she used the knife to cut between the ties, and suddenly the baby was its own separate person, no longer part of her body. The realization made her sob harder. They were 2 separate beings now, 2 people trying to survive in this frozen nightmare. Natalie tried to wrap the baby in her shawl, but everything was damp from the snow that had blown into the wagon through the gaps in the canvas. She held the infant against her skin inside her coat, hoping her body heat would be enough. The baby was still crying, which she took as a good sign, but the cries were getting weaker. They were both going to freeze to death if she could not get warm. She needed to deliver the afterbirth still. Another contraction came, milder this time, and she felt the placenta slip out of her body. She was bleeding, she could feel it, but did not know if it was too much or a normal amount. Everything felt wrong and right at the same time. She was so cold, so impossibly cold. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the baby, even though she did not believe it. "Someone will find us. Someone has to find us." But the storm was getting worse. The wind howled louder, shaking the wagon, and snow was piling up against the wheels. No one was coming. No one even knew they were here. Natalie closed her eyes, held her baby close, and prepared to die. That was when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Muffled by the snow, but definitely there, getting closer. She tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. She tried again, forcing the sound from her raw throat. "Help, please help us." The hoofbeats stopped. Then she heard boots crunching through snow, coming closer to the wagon. Natalie felt a surge of hope so strong it hurt. "Hello, is someone in there?" A man's voice, deep and concerned. Natalie tried to answer, but another wave of dizziness washed over her. "Please," she managed. "My baby." The canvas covering at the back of the wagon was yanked open, and a man's face appeared, covered partially by a wool scarf against the cold. She could see his eyes, though, dark brown and wide with shock as he took in the scene before him. Blood on the wagon floor, the afterbirth, and Natalie holding a barely moving bundle against her chest. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, then immediately climbed into the wagon. "Madam, when did you deliver? How long have you been out here?" "Just now," Natalie whispered. "Maybe half an hour ago. The baby is so cold. Please help my baby." The man was already pulling off his heavy coat, wrapping it around both Natalie and the infant. "My ranch is about a mile from here. Can you ride if I hold you?" "I do not know. I am bleeding." His jaw tightened under the scarf. "We do not have a choice. You will both die if we stay here. I need to get you inside, get you warm, and get a doctor out here as soon as this storm breaks." He lifted Natalie as carefully as he could, but she still cried out in pain. Everything hurt, and she was so weak. She could barely hold onto the baby. The man noticed and adjusted his grip, supporting both of them as he carried them out of the wagon and through the snow to where a large bay horse stood waiting. "This is going to be rough," he warned, "but my horse is steady. Just hold on to me and do not let go of that baby." Somehow he managed to mount the horse while holding Natalie, settling her in front of him in the saddle with the baby tucked between them. Natalie leaned back against his chest, too weak to do anything else. She could feel his warmth through his shirt, could hear his steady heartbeat against her back. He wrapped his arms around both of them and urged the horse forward. The ride was agony. Every step the horse took sent pain shooting through Natalie's body. She was still bleeding, could feel it soaking through her skirts, but the man held her steady, held them both safe, and kept murmuring encouragement in her ear. "Almost there. You are doing fine. Just hold on a little longer." Natalie did not remember much of the rest of the ride. She faded in and out, aware only of the cold, the pain, and the small warm weight of her baby still pressed against her chest. When she next opened her eyes with any clarity, they were inside somewhere warm. A house. The man was laying her down on a bed near a roaring fireplace. "Stay with me," he said firmly, looking into her eyes. "I need you to stay awake. What is your name?" "Natalie," she whispered. "Natalie Fletcher." "I am Xavier Morrison. You are safe now, Natalie. Let me see the baby." She reluctantly released her hold on the infant, and Xavier gently unwrapped the bundle. For the first time, Natalie could see clearly. A girl. She had delivered a baby girl. Xavier worked with swift efficiency, rubbing the baby's tiny limbs to get the blood flowing, wrapping her in warm, dry blankets he pulled from a chest. The baby's cries grew stronger, which made Natalie's heart soar despite her exhaustion. "She is strong," Xavier said with something like wonder in his voice. "Small but strong. She is going to make it." "And me?" Natalie asked weakly. Xavier's expression grew serious as he looked at her blood-soaked skirts. "You are still bleeding too much. I need to check, need to see if I can stop it." "Is that all right?" Natalie nodded. She was too tired to be modest, too close to death to care. Xavier disappeared for a moment and returned with clean cloths and a basin of water that he must have been warming by the fire. He worked quickly and professionally, clearly not a stranger to dealing with medical emergencies on a ranch. "The afterbirth came out completely?" he asked. "Yes, I think so." "Good. That is good." He pressed cloths against her, applying pressure. "Your body is just adjusting. The bleeding should slow soon. You need rest and warmth and food." He covered her with heavy quilts, so many that Natalie immediately felt warmer than she had in days. Xavier placed the baby, now wrapped snugly in blankets and starting to root around with her mouth, in Natalie's arms. "She is going to be hungry soon," Xavier said. "Do you know how to nurse?" "I have seen it done. I can try." "Good. I am going to make some broth for you, get your strength back up. Then once the storm passes, I will ride for the doctor in Las Lunas to make sure you are both truly all right." Natalie looked up at this man who had saved her life, this stranger who was treating her with such care. Xavier Morrison appeared to be in his late 20s, tall and lean with dark hair and those kind brown eyes. His hands were gentle despite their calluses, and his voice was steady and calm. "Why were you out in the storm?" she asked. "One of my cattle wandered off. I was trying to find her before she froze." He gave a slight smile. "Found something much more important instead." Natalie felt tears sliding down her cheeks again. "Thank you, you saved our lives." "Rest now," Xavier said softly. "We can talk later. You need to focus on recovering and taking care of that little girl." He left the room and Natalie looked down at her daughter. The baby's eyes were closed, her tiny fists curled up by her face. She was beautiful, perfect. And she was alive because this stranger had heard Natalie's cries through the storm. Natalie tried to position the baby to nurse, fumbling with her bodice. It took several attempts, but finally the baby latched on, and Natalie felt a rush of relief. Her body knew what to do even if her mind was uncertain. She lay back against the pillows, holding her daughter close, and let herself drift into an exhausted sleep. When she woke, the room was darker, lit only by the fire. Xavier was sitting in a chair near the bed, watching over them. When he saw her eyes open, he stood and brought over a bowl of broth. "You need to eat something," he said. "Can you sit up?" With his help, Natalie managed to prop herself up against the headboard. The baby was still sleeping peacefully against her chest. Xavier held the bowl for her and helped her sip the warm broth. It was the most delicious thing Natalie had ever tasted, rich and salty and warming her from the inside out. "Where is your husband?" Xavier asked gently. "Was he the one driving the wagon?" Natalie's throat tightened. "He died 3 days ago. The influenza took him so fast. I tried to keep going, tried to reach his brother's ranch near Las Lunas, but then the storm came and I got lost and the baby started coming." Her voice broke. I thought we were going to die. Xavier's expression was pained. I am sorry for your loss. That is an unbearable thing to face alone. Do you have a wife? Natalie asked, suddenly aware that she was alone in this house with a strange man. Will she mind that I am here? No wife, Xavier said quietly. It is just me and my ranch hand Miguel, though he is in town until the storm passes. This ranch belonged to my father. He died 2 years ago and I have been running it since. So you are alone out here too. Usually, but I prefer it that way. He gave her another spoonful of broth. Once the storm clears, I will help you get to your brother-in-law's place. Where is his ranch? Just south of Las Lunas. The Patterson Ranch. Xavier's eyebrows rose. John Patterson, I know him. Good man. Why did you not send word ahead that you were coming? He would have met you in Santa Fe, made sure you arrived safely. Natalie looked down at her sleeping daughter. Thomas was stubborn. We had already delayed the journey because of the baby, and he insisted we could make it on our own. We left St. Louis 3 months ago, and it had been such a hard journey already. Thomas wanted to prove he could take care of us without help. Pride can kill a man, Xavier said, but not unkindly. Still, you are here now and you are safe. That is what matters. Over the next few days, the storm raged outside while Natalie slowly regained her strength inside Xavier's warm house. He was an attentive caretaker, bringing her meals, making sure she had enough blankets, helping her with the baby when she was too exhausted to manage alone. He never made her feel like a burden, never made her feel uncomfortable, though the situation was highly unusual. The baby, whom Natalie had named Grace, was thriving despite her rough start. She nursed well and slept peacefully, and her tiny fists were already stronger, gripping Natalie's finger with surprising force. Xavier seemed fascinated by the infant. He would sit by the bed in the evenings after finishing his ranch work, watching Grace sleep with an expression Natalie could not quite read. "Have you ever held a baby?" she asked him one evening. He shook his head. "Never had the opportunity. My mother died when I was young, and I was an only child. Babies are scarce out here on the ranches. Would you like to hold her?" Xavier looked uncertain but nodded. Natalie carefully transferred Grace into his large hands, showing him how to support her head. Xavier held the baby as if she were made of glass, his expression softening in a way that made Natalie's heart do something strange in her chest. "She is so small," he murmured. "Hard to believe something this small made it through what you both went through." "She has her mother's stubbornness," Natalie said with a small smile. Xavier looked up at her, his dark eyes warm. "Then she has a very good chance at a long, strong life." Something passed between them in that moment, something Natalie could not name but could definitely feel. She looked away, confused by the flutter in her stomach. Her husband had been dead less than a week. She should not be feeling anything for another man, especially not this man who had done nothing but show her kindness. But she could not deny that Xavier Morrison stirred something in her, something she had never felt with Thomas. Thomas had been practical, solid, a good provider. Natalie had married him because it made sense, because her family approved, because she was 21 and it was time. She had cared for him, but she was not sure she had ever truly loved him, not in the wild, passionate way she had read about in books. Looking at Xavier holding her daughter, Natalie wondered what it would be like to be loved by a man like him. A man who was gentle and strong at the same time, who treated her like she was precious, who looked at her baby with such tenderness. She shook the thoughts away. She was being foolish, emotional from everything she had been through. Xavier was just being kind. That was all. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Xavier rode out early in the morning to check on his cattle and to bring back the doctor from Las Lunas. Natalie was up and walking now, though still weak, and she spent the day caring for Grace and exploring Xavier's house. It was a simple structure, well built against the harsh New Mexico winters, with 2 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen. Everything was clean but sparse, decorated with only the essentials. It was clearly a bachelor's home, yet Xavier had gone out of his way to make her comfortable, giving up his own bedroom for her and sleeping in the smaller room. When Xavier returned that evening with the doctor, Natalie was nursing Grace by the fire. The doctor, an older man named Dr. Samuel Williams, examined both of them thoroughly. "You are a very lucky woman, Mrs. Fletcher," he said finally. "Everything looks good, all things considered. The baby is healthy, you are healing well. You should avoid travel for at least another week, but after that, you should be fine to continue your journey." After the doctor left, Xavier made dinner while Natalie rocked Grace to sleep. They ate together at his small table, a surprisingly domestic scene that felt both comfortable and charged with something unspoken. "I sent word to John Patterson," Xavier said. "Let him know you are here and safe. He should arrive in a few days to collect you." Natalie felt her stomach drop. "Oh. Of course, thank you." Xavier was watching her carefully. "Unless you would prefer to stay longer, the doctor said another week of rest would be good. I do not want to impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." "You are not imposing." Xavier's voice was firm. "Natalie, I want you to know that you are welcome here for as long as you need. There is no rush." She met his eyes across the table. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I found you in that wagon, I thought I was going to watch you die. I thought I was going to have to bury you and that baby in the snow, and something about that idea was unbearable. I have seen a lot of death out here, Natalie. My mother when I was 10, my father 2 years ago, ranch hands over the years. But the thought of losing you, a woman I had never even met, felt like it would break something in me." Natalie's breath caught. "Xavier, I am not asking for anything," he continued. "I know your husband just died. I know you are grieving and dealing with a new baby and probably 100 other emotions I cannot even imagine. But I need you to know that having you here, it has made this house feel alive for the first time in years. And I am going to miss that when you leave." "I am going to miss it too," Natalie admitted quietly. "I feel safe here. I feel like I can breathe." They looked at each other in the flickering firelight, and Natalie felt that pull again, that magnetic draw toward this man who had saved her life. She wanted to reach across the table and take his hand. She wanted him to hold her the way he had held Grace, with such care and tenderness. She wanted things she had no right to want. Instead, she stood up, excused herself, and went to bed, lying awake for hours thinking about Xavier Morrison, and what it meant that her heart was already moving on when Thomas had barely been dead a week. John Patterson arrived 3 days later, a burly man in his 40s with a kind face and a booming voice. He swept Natalie up in a bear hug, tears in his eyes. "Thomas's last letter said you were coming, but we expected you weeks ago. When we did not hear anything, I feared the worst. Thank God Xavier found you." Over dinner, Natalie told John the full story of what had happened. John's face grew increasingly pained as she described Thomas's death, the blizzard, giving birth alone in the wagon. "My brother was a proud fool," John said finally. "He should have waited for me to meet you, should have traveled with a group, should have done a lot of things differently. He was trying to take care of us," Natalie said softly, though she harbored her own frustrations with Thomas's stubbornness. "And he failed," John said bluntly. "Left you to nearly die alone. I am sorry, Natalie. You deserved better." After dinner, John announced that he would take Natalie and Grace back to his ranch the next day. His wife Sarah was eager to meet them, and they had plenty of room. Natalie should have been relieved. This was what she had been traveling toward for months, the safe haven where she and her baby could start their new life. But instead, she felt like crying. That night, after John had gone to bed in the spare room, Natalie found Xavier outside on the porch, staring out at the stars. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "It is beautiful out here," she said. "So different from Missouri." "It grows on you," Xavier said. "At first, the emptiness feels suffocating, but then you realize there is a freedom in it, room to breathe, room to be yourself." "Is that why you stayed? After your father died?" "Partly. And partly because I did not know where else to go. This ranch is all I have ever known." He paused. "What about you? What are your plans once you get to John's ranch?" Natalie hugged her shawl tighter. "I do not know. Raise Grace, I suppose. Help Sarah with the household. Try to figure out how to live this life I suddenly have." "Is that what you want?" "I do not know what I want anymore." She turned to look at him. "A week ago, I wanted to die. I wanted the pain and the cold to just stop. But then you found me, and now I am alive, and Grace is alive, and everything feels different." Xavier turned to face her fully. "Natalie, I need to tell you something, and you can hate me for it if you want. But when you leave tomorrow, I do not know when I will see you again, so I need to say it." Her heart was racing. "What is it?" "I am falling for you." The words came out rough, almost pained. "I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving. I know you have a baby and a whole complicated life, and I have no right to feel anything for you, but I do. I think I started falling the moment I pulled back that canvas and saw you holding Grace. You were so brave, so fierce, so determined to protect your baby even though you thought you were dying. And every day you have been here, every conversation, every time I see you with Grace, I fall a little more." Natalie could not breathe. "Xavier, you do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Because if you go to John's ranch and realize after a few weeks or months that you are not happy there, I want you to know that you have another option. You and Grace are welcome here. Not as guests, but as family. As mine, if you will have me." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face now. "My husband has been dead for a week. I know. People would talk. They would say terrible things. I do not care what people say. I do not know if I can give you what you deserve. I do not know if I know how to love someone the way you deserve to be loved." Xavier reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Then let me teach you. Let me show you what it is like to be loved completely, without conditions, without pride getting in the way. Let me be the father Grace deserves, the husband you deserve." Natalie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I am scared. I know, so am I. What if I am just confused? What if this is just gratitude or trauma, or then we will figure it out together? But Natalie, look at me." She opened her eyes and met his steady gaze. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am not even asking you to stay right now. I am just asking you to consider it. Go to John's ranch, take your time, figure out what you want. But know that I will be here waiting for as long as it takes." Natalie surprised herself by reaching up and touching his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "You are a good man, Xavier Morrison. I am a man who knows what he wants, and I want you." She stood on her toes and kissed him, just a brief touch of lips, but it sent electricity through her entire body. Xavier did not push for more, just rested his forehead against hers and held her as they listened to the wind blow across the prairie. The next morning, John loaded Natalie and Grace into his wagon. Xavier helped secure their few belongings, the supplies he had given them for the baby, blankets, and food for the journey. When it was time to go, Natalie found she could not stop crying. "Thank you for everything," she said, holding Grace against her chest. "I will never forget what you did for us." Xavier looked like he wanted to say something but glanced at John and stayed quiet. Instead, he gently touched Grace's tiny hand, then squeezed Natalie's shoulder. "Take care of yourself." The ride to the Patterson ranch took most of the day. John's wife, Sarah, was a plump, warm woman in her late 30s who immediately took Natalie under her wing. She cooed over Grace, set Natalie up in a comfortable bedroom, and made sure she had everything she could possibly need. The Patterson ranch was larger than Xavier's, bustling with activity. John and Sarah had 4 children of their own, ranging from 6 to 15, and they were all excited to have a baby in the house. Sarah's sister also lived with them, helping with the household duties. It should have been perfect. This was exactly what Natalie had been traveling toward, a safe place to raise her daughter surrounded by family. But every night as she lay in bed, she thought of Xavier's quiet house, his steady presence, the way he had looked at her under the stars. 2 weeks passed. Natalie settled into life at the Patterson ranch, helping Sarah with cooking and mending, taking care of Grace, getting to know her new family. Everyone was kind, welcoming, generous. John had made it clear that she and Grace could stay as long as they wanted, that they were family. But Natalie felt like she was living someone else's life. It was Sarah who finally brought it up, cornering Natalie in the kitchen one afternoon while the children were at school and John was out with the cattle. "You are thinking about him," Sarah said. It was not a question. Natalie looked up from the bread she was kneading. "I do not know what you mean, Xavier Morrison. John told me how he found you, how he took care of you and the baby, and I can see it in your eyes. You are wishing you were back there." Natalie's throat tightened. "Thomas just died." "I should not be thinking about another man." Sarah snorted. "Thomas was my brother-in-law and I loved him, but let me be honest with you. He was selfish. He was prideful. He put his need to prove himself above your safety and his child's safety, and it got him killed and nearly killed you too. You do not owe his memory more than what you feel." Sarah. "And from what John says, Xavier Morrison is a good man, a kind man, the kind of man who rides out in a blizzard to find a lost cow and ends up saving a woman's life instead. The kind of man who takes in strangers and cares for them without asking for anything in return. That is rare, Natalie. That is special. But what will people think? It has only been a few weeks. People always think something, but you know what they will also think? That you are a practical woman who needs a husband to help raise that baby. That you are smart for securing a good provider. It is 1881, Natalie. Women remarry quickly out here all the time, especially widows with children. It is just the way life works." Natalie sat down heavily in a chair, still holding Grace against her shoulder. "I am scared. What if I am making a mistake? What if he changes his mind? Then you come back here and we take care of you. But Natalie, you cannot live your life being scared of what might go wrong." Xavier made his feelings clear. Now you need to figure out your own feelings and decide what you want your life to look like. That night, Natalie lay in bed with Grace sleeping beside her and really let herself think about Xavier. Not just the gratitude she felt for him saving their lives, but the man himself. The way he moved, confident and capable. The way he spoke, direct and honest. The way he looked at her like she was something precious. The way he had held Grace, like she was already his to protect. She thought about the life she could have with him. A quiet house on a ranch, yes, but also a partner who respected her, who wanted to know her thoughts, who would never put pride above her safety. She thought about waking up next to him, about watching him teach Grace to ride when she got older, about maybe having more children together, a real family built on choice rather than obligation. And she realized that what she felt for Xavier was not just gratitude or confusion. It was love. Real love, the kind that made her heart race and her stomach flip. The kind she had never felt for Thomas, as guilty as that made her feel. She had loved Thomas in a way, but she had not been in love with him. There was a difference. The next morning, Natalie found John in the barn and asked if he would take her back to Xavier's ranch. John looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "It is about time you figured it out. I will have the wagon ready after lunch." Sarah helped Natalie pack, giving her knowing looks and warm hugs. "I am happy for you," she said. "Come visit us soon and let us know when the wedding is." "I have not even told him I want to stay yet." "He will say yes," Sarah said with certainty. "That man looked at you like you hung the moon. He is not going to let you slip away." The ride back to Xavier's ranch felt both endless and too short. Natalie's stomach was in knots. What if Xavier had changed his mind? What if he had only said those things because he thought she was leaving and he would never see her again? What if she was making a huge mistake? But then they arrived, and Xavier came out of the barn, and the look on his face when he saw her in the wagon made all of Natalie's doubts disappear. It was like watching the sun break through clouds. Pure joy, undisguised and overwhelming. John helped her down from the wagon, handed over her bags, and winked at her. "I will see you too soon," he said, then climbed back up and rode off before Natalie could even thank him properly. She turned to face Xavier, holding Grace against her chest. He had not moved from where he stood by the barn, like he was afraid if he came closer she might disappear. "I thought about what you said," Natalie began, her voice shaking. "About having options, about you being here, waiting. I am still here. I will always be here. I am not ready to get married right away. I need time to grieve properly, to figure out who I am as a mother, to just breathe for a while. I understand. But I want to stay here, with you. I want to see where this goes, where we go. Because, Xavier, I think I am falling in love with you too, and that terrifies me. But it also feels like the first true thing I have felt in a very long time." Xavier closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms, careful not to crush Grace between them. He pressed his face into Natalie's hair and just held her. "You can have all the time you need," he murmured. "I am not going anywhere." Natalie pulled back enough to look up at him. "I need you to know something. I cared about Thomas. He was my husband, and his death was tragic, and I am sad that he will never know his daughter. But Xavier, I did not love him the way I am starting to love you, and I need you to be all right with that, with the fact that what I feel for you is different, bigger, scarier." "I am more than all right with that," Xavier said, his eyes intense. "I want all of you, Natalie. The scared parts, the brave parts, the parts still figuring things out. I want to be there for all of it." She kissed him then, properly this time, and it felt like coming home. The next few months were the happiest of Natalie's life. She and Grace settled into Xavier's house, and slowly it became their house. Natalie added curtains to the windows, flowers on the table, her books on the shelves. Xavier built a crib for Grace, carved with little flowers along the railings. He would come in from working on the ranch and immediately wash up so he could hold the baby, talking to her about the cattle and the weather and whatever else was on his mind. He was so good with Grace. Patient and gentle, singing her silly songs when she fussed, walking her around the house when she could not sleep. Watching him with her daughter made Natalie fall even more deeply in love with him. They talked for hours in the evenings, sitting by the fire after Grace went to sleep. Xavier told her about growing up on the ranch, about losing his mother to cholera, about his father teaching him everything about running a cattle operation. Natalie told him about Missouri, about her large family, about how she had always felt like she did not quite fit in their small town. "I always wanted something more," she admitted one night. "But I did not know what that was until I came here, until I met you. This feels like where I am supposed to be." Xavier took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I spent so long thinking I was fine alone, convincing myself I did not need anyone. But having you here, having Grace here, I realize I was not fine. I was just surviving. Now I am living." They were careful with each other physically, both aware that Natalie needed time to heal from the birth and to process her grief. But there was an intimacy in their daily life that was more powerful than anything physical. The way Xavier would brush her hair before bed. The way Natalie would massage his sore shoulders after a long day. The way they moved around the kitchen together, anticipating each other's needs without words. Miguel, Xavier's ranch hand, returned from town and immediately approved of the new living arrangements. He was a wiry man in his 50s who had worked for Xavier's father and stayed on after the old man died. He doted on Grace, carving her little wooden toys, and he treated Natalie with respectful warmth. "I am glad the boss finally found someone," Miguel told Natalie one day when they were hanging laundry together. "He has been lonely for too long, needs a family." "We are not married yet," Natalie said, though there was no heat in it. "You will be," Miguel said with certainty. "Just a matter of time." He was right, of course. 6 months after Natalie arrived on Xavier's doorstep bleeding and terrified, he proposed properly. It was early spring, and the prairie was coming alive with wildflowers. Xavier had taken Natalie and Grace on a picnic, spreading a blanket under a cottonwood tree by the creek that ran through his property. Grace was 8 months old now, a chubby, happy baby who was just starting to crawl. She was exploring the blanket while Natalie and Xavier lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "I have been thinking," Xavier said, "about what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And what do you see? I see you. I see Grace, older, running around the ranch getting into everything. I see more children if you want them. I see growing old together, watching grandchildren play in this same spot. I see a life full of love and laughter and all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with family." Natalie turned to look at him. "That sounds like a good life. It is the only life I want." Xavier sat up and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire set in the center. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to save it for someone special. Natalie Fletcher, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Grace's father? Will you build this life with me?" Natalie was crying, but this time they were happy tears. "Yes, God, yes." Xavier slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, sweet and deep and full of promise. Grace chose that moment to crawl over and pull herself up on Xavier's leg, babbling happily. Xavier laughed and scooped her up, holding her between them. "What do you think, Gracie? You want me to be your papa?" Grace just grabbed his nose and squealed with delight. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Las Lunas. John and Sarah Patterson came, along with their children, and several of Xavier's rancher friends and their families. Dr. Williams was there, and Miguel stood up as Xavier's best man. Natalie wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers. Grace was in Sarah's arms during the ceremony, wearing a tiny dress with lace trim. Xavier wore his best suit, though he kept tugging at the collar, clearly uncomfortable in formal clothes. But when Natalie walked down the aisle toward him, his face transformed. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, like he could not believe his luck. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed. At the reception at the Patterson Ranch, Xavier and Natalie danced under the stars while their friends and family celebrated around them. Xavier was not a particularly good dancer, but he held Natalie close and swayed with her, and that was all she needed. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Xavier murmured into her hair. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing this life. It was the easiest choice I ever made." That night, they went home to their ranch as husband and wife. Miguel had agreed to watch Grace for the night, giving them privacy. Xavier carried Natalie over the threshold, both of them laughing, and gently set her down in their bedroom. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little. It has been a long time, and I have never," she paused, trying to find the right words. "Thomas was my only experience, and it was not particularly good. He was not patient or gentle." Xavier's jaw tightened. "I will be both. I promise you, Natalie. I want this to be good for you. If something does not feel right, you tell me and we stop, all right?" She nodded, feeling some of her anxiety ease. Xavier would not hurt her. She knew that in her bones. He undressed her slowly, reverently, kissing each new patch of exposed skin. When she was bare before him, he just looked at her for a long moment. "You are so beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So incredibly beautiful." Then he showed her what it was like to be loved by someone who cared about her pleasure as much as his own. He was patient and thorough and attentive, paying attention to what made her gasp and sigh. When they finally came together, it was not just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, a joining of two people who had chosen each other against all odds. Afterward, Natalie lay in Xavier's arms, feeling more content than she ever had in her life. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel safe, for making me feel cherished, for showing me what love is supposed to be like." Xavier kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart, with Grace's heart. I will protect you both for the rest of my life." They fell asleep tangled together. And when Natalie woke in the morning to the sun streaming through the window and her husband's arms around her, she felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The years that followed were full of joy and hard work and the normal challenges of ranch life. Grace grew into a spirited little girl with her mother's determination and her adopted father's kind heart. She called Xavier Papa from the time she could talk, and he doted on her shamelessly. 2 years after their wedding, Natalie gave birth to a son they named Thomas Xavier, after both of their fathers. The birth was easier this time, with Xavier and Dr. Williams both present, and the baby was healthy and strong. Xavier cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with emotion. "I never thought I would have this," he said, looking at Natalie in the bed, exhausted but smiling, and at Grace, who was peeking at her new brother with wide eyes. "A family of my own. It is more than I ever dreamed." 3 years after Thomas came daughter Lily, and then 2 years later, another son named James. The house that had once been so quiet was now filled with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Xavier expanded the house, adding bedrooms and a bigger kitchen, and they hired help for the ranch as the cattle operation grew more successful. Natalie had never been happier. She loved her children, loved her husband, loved the life they had built together. Sometimes she thought about that terrible night in the frozen wagon when she had been sure she was going to die, and she marveled at how much had changed. That night had brought her to Xavier, had given her the family she never knew she needed. Grace, now a confident 8-year-old, knew the story of how Xavier had saved her and her mother. She loved to hear it told, especially the part where Xavier heard Natalie's cries through the storm. "So you are my hero," Grace would say to Xavier, climbing into his lap. "Your mama is the real hero," Xavier always replied. "She is the bravest person I know." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Natalie back to the spot where he had proposed by the creek. The children were with Sarah and John for the weekend, giving them rare time alone. They spread a blanket under the same cottonwood tree, now much bigger than it had been a decade ago. "You remember what I said here?" Xavier asked, holding Natalie close. "You said you saw our future, children and grandchildren and growing old together. And have I been right so far?" Natalie laughed. "Spectacularly right, though I do not think either of us anticipated quite how chaotic 4 children would be. Worth every moment of chaos." Xavier kissed her temple. "I would do it all again, exactly the same." "Well, except maybe I would find you earlier, save you from marrying Thomas in the first place. But then Grace would not exist, and I would not have been the person I was when you found me. I needed those experiences, as hard as they were, to become who I am now." "You are right," Xavier conceded. "I just hate that you had to suffer. The suffering brought me to you, and that makes everything worth it." They lay together watching the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Natalie thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl in the frozen wagon. She had survived, had thrived, had built a life full of love. "I am grateful," she said quietly, "for all of it. The hard parts and the good parts and everything in between. Because it all led me here to you, to our family." "I am grateful too," Xavier said. "Every single day I am grateful." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they held each other and talked about their children, about the ranch, about all the dreams they still had for the future. There would be more children eventually, grandchildren to spoil, decades of life still ahead of them. But in that moment, it was just the 2 of them. 2 people who had found each other in the midst of a storm and chosen to build something beautiful together. Grace married at 20 to a kind young rancher named Samuel Morris who worked on a neighboring property. The wedding was held at the ranch, with all of their friends and family in attendance. Natalie cried watching her daughter, the baby she had delivered alone in a frozen wagon, walk down the aisle in a beautiful white dress. "She is so grown up," Natalie whispered to Xavier as they watched from the front row, their other children lined up beside them. "She is you," Xavier whispered back. "Strong and brave and ready to take on the world." A year later, Grace made them grandparents with the birth of a daughter she named Natalie Grace. When Grace placed the tiny baby in Natalie's arms, the circle felt complete somehow. Life continuing, generation after generation, all because Natalie had survived that terrible night and Xavier had heard her cries. Thomas Xavier grew up to be a talented horseman who helped expand the ranch operation. Lily became a teacher in Las Lunas, marrying a shopkeeper and starting her own family in town. James, the youngest, stayed on the ranch with Xavier, learning every aspect of the business and eventually taking over when Xavier decided to slow down. As Natalie and Xavier aged, they spent more time sitting on their porch watching the prairie, holding hands and reminiscing about their life together. They watched their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played, saw the ranch continue to thrive under James's management, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, Xavier stood and gave a toast. 40 years ago, I rode out into a blizzard looking for a lost cow. Instead, I found the love of my life bleeding and terrified in a frozen wagon, having just delivered a baby alone. I brought her inside and she never left. Best decision I ever made. Natalie Morrison, you have given me everything. A family, a purpose, a love that has sustained me through every challenge. I would ride through 1,000 blizzards if it meant finding you at the end of every one. Natalie stood and kissed him to the cheers and applause of their family. "And I would go through it all again," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "Every moment of fear, every moment of pain, because it brought me to you. You saved my life that night, Xavier. But more than that, you showed me what it meant to truly live. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." Their family raised their glasses, celebrating not just the anniversary, but the love that had created all of them. Grace, now a middle-aged woman herself with grown children, caught her mother's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Natalie smiled, understanding. "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for choosing love. Thank you for building this family that we all get to be part of." As the party continued around them, Natalie and Xavier slipped away to their porch, wanting a moment of quiet together. They sat in their rocking chairs, hands clasped between them, watching the sun set over the prairie they had called home for so many years. "Are you happy?" Xavier asked, as he had asked her so many times over the decades. "Blissfully," Natalie replied, as she always did. "You, more than I have words for." They rocked in comfortable silence, listening to the laughter of their family drifting out from the house. The wind whispered through the grass, the same wind that had howled through that blizzard so long ago. But now it was gentle, warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of another beautiful New Mexico summer. Natalie thought about the girl she had been, young and scared and certain she was going to die in that frozen wagon. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her, that out of that darkness would come decades of light and love, would she have believed it? Probably not. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones you cannot imagine until they are standing right in front of you, offering a hand and a way forward. Xavier had been her way forward, and she had been his. Together they had built something lasting, something beautiful, something that would continue long after they were gone. As the stars began to appear in the twilight sky, Natalie leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They stayed like that until their grandchildren came looking for them, pulling them back inside for cake and more celebration. But in that quiet moment on the porch, Natalie felt the peace that comes from a life fully lived, a love fully given and received. She had survived the impossible, found the improbable, and built a legacy that would echo through generations. And it had all started with a cry in the darkness and a cowboy brave enough to answer. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Natalie and Xavier aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping the years with lines of laughter and love. They never lost the connection that had formed that first night when Xavier had carried her through the blizzard to safety. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming as essential and constant as breathing. Their children thrived, each building their own lives while staying connected to the ranch and to each other. Family dinners every Sunday became tradition. With the long table Xavier had built extended to its maximum length to accommodate everyone. Natalie would sit at one end, Xavier at the other, and between them would be their children, their spouses, their grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, a living testament to the love that had started in such unlikely circumstances. Grace remained especially close to her parents, perhaps because she knew the story of her birth more intimately than anyone. She would visit several times a week, bringing her own grandchildren to play in the same places she had played as a child. Sometimes she would sit with Natalie on the porch and they would talk about that night in the wagon. "Do you remember it clearly?" Grace asked once. "The birth, the cold, thinking you were going to die. Every detail," Natalie said. "But the strange thing is, when I think about it now, the fear and pain are distant. What I remember most clearly is the moment I heard your father's voice outside the wagon, That moment when I realized we were going to be saved. That is what stayed with me. He is a good man, Grace said, watching Xavier across the yard teaching one of the great-grandchildren to rope a fence post. The best man, Natalie agreed. I think about how easily it could have gone differently. What if he had not ridden out that day? What if he had not heard me? What if he had decided it was too dangerous to investigate? But he did. And you were brave enough to survive until he found you, and then brave enough to choose love again when you could have shut yourself off from it. It did not feel like bravery. It felt like survival. Like finding air after drowning. Grace squeezed her mother's hand. Maybe that is what bravery is. Choosing to survive, choosing to live, choosing to love, even when it would be easier not to. As Natalie entered her 70s, her health began to decline slowly. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down of a body that had lived a full life. Xavier tended to her with the same devotion he had shown that first night, making sure she was comfortable, bringing her tea, reading to her when her eyes grew tired. "You do not have to hover," she told him one afternoon when he had checked on her for the third time in an hour. "I am not hovering. I am being attentive," Xavier replied with a smile. "Besides, I made a promise 47 years ago to take care of you. I intend to keep it." 47 years, Natalie mused. Where did the time go? Into every laugh, every meal, every sunset, every grandchild's first step. Time well spent, I would say. Time perfectly spent, Natalie corrected. That winter was harsh, reminiscent of the winter they had met. Natalie found herself thinking more and more about that time, about how close she had come to death, about how Xavier had saved not just her life, but had given her a life worth living. One particularly cold night, when the wind howled around the house in a way that brought back memories of that blizzard, Natalie woke from a dream about the wagon. In the dream, she had been back there, giving birth alone, but this time Xavier had not come. This time she had died in the cold and Grace with her, and everything they had built had never existed. She must have made a sound because Xavier woke immediately, pulling her close. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just a dream. A bad one. About the wagon." "How did you know? You always have them when the wind sounds like this. Tell me." So Natalie told him about the dream, about the version of events where he had not found them. Xavier held her tighter, his face pressed into her hair. "But I did find you," he said firmly. "I heard you and I found you and I brought you home. That is what happened. That is our truth." "I know. But sometimes I think about how easily it could have been different, how much I would have missed. Our children, our grandchildren, all these years with you. It is overwhelming to think about." "Then do not think about it. Think about what did happen. Think about the fact that we are here together after nearly 5 decades. Think about how lucky we are." "I am thinking about it. I think about it every day." Xavier kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We have been blessed, you and I. Against all odds, we found each other and we built something beautiful. Not everyone gets that." "No," Natalie agreed, settling back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Not everyone gets that." As spring returned, so did Natalie's energy. She spent warm days in the garden she had cultivated over the decades, growing vegetables and flowers, enjoying the feel of earth under her fingers. Xavier would join her often, claiming he was there to help but mostly just sitting nearby, watching her work, content to be in her presence. "What are you smiling about?" Natalie asked him one afternoon, catching him looking at her with that soft expression he got sometimes. "You, still beautiful, still strong, still the woman I fell in love with in the middle of a blizzard. I am old and wrinkled and my back hurts most days. You are experienced and wise and you have earned every line on your face. You are beautiful, Natalie. You always have been, you always will be." She crossed the garden to kiss him, dirt still on her hands, and he pulled her into his lap right there on the ground, making her laugh. "Xavier Morrison, we are too old for this. Speak for yourself. I feel 25 right now." They sat there in the garden, surrounded by new growth and the promise of another harvest, and Natalie felt that familiar surge of gratitude that had become part of her daily existence. Gratitude for this man, this life, this love that had sustained her through everything. On Natalie's 75th birthday, the family threw a large celebration. Friends from all over the territory came, including some of the Patterson family, though John and Sarah had both passed years before. Dr. Williams had died a decade earlier, but his son, who had taken over his practice, attended with his own family. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and stories told about Natalie's life. Grace stood up and shared the story of her birth, which everyone had heard many times but never tired of hearing. It had become part of the family mythology, the founding story of their clan. "My mother is the strongest person I know," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "She survived the impossible, chose love when she could have chosen fear, and built a family that has blessed all of us. Mama, I hope you know how much you are loved, how much we all appreciate the sacrifices you made, the courage you showed, the love you have given freely for all these years." Natalie cried, of course, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them there because she had survived that night in the wagon. Because Xavier had heard her cries. Because they had chosen each other and built this life together. Xavier, now 78 and moving slower but still sharp and present, stood and offered his own toast. "Natalie, my love, my life, my everything. 75 years you have walked this earth, and I have been privileged to walk beside you for 49 of them. You made me a better man. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to wake up every morning. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Happy birthday, my darling." Everyone raised their glasses, and Natalie felt overwhelmed by the love in the room. This was what she had built. This was her legacy. Not just the children she had borne, but the love she had nurtured, the home she had created, the example she had set of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, forgiveness over bitterness. As the years continued, Natalie and Xavier settled into the quiet rhythms of old age. They spent mornings on the porch, afternoons napping or reading, evenings watching the sunset. They did not talk as much as they once had, but they did not need to. After half a century together, they communicated in glances and touches and comfortable silences. James and his wife had taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Xavier to finally rest. He had worked hard his whole life, and Natalie was glad to see him slow down, to see him enjoy the fruits of his labor. They traveled occasionally, visiting Lily in town, taking trips to see distant relatives, but mostly they stayed home, content in their own space. When Xavier was 81, he had a heart attack. It was not fatal, but it scared both of them badly. Dr. Williams's son, now the primary doctor in the area, said Xavier needed to take it even easier, avoid stress, and accept that his body was slowing down. "I am not ready," Xavier told Natalie that night as they lay in bed together. "I am not ready to leave you." "Then do not," Natalie said, though her voice shook. "Stay with me. We have more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil, more life to live." "I will try," he promised. "God knows I will try." Xavier recovered slowly, but the heart attack had taken something out of him. He tired more easily, moved more carefully, and Natalie could see the awareness of his own mortality in his eyes. It frightened her more than she wanted to admit. She had grown so used to Xavier being her constant, her rock, her safe place. The idea of losing him was unthinkable, but she also knew that life did not last forever. They had been blessed with decades together, far more than many people got. If their time was coming to an end, she was determined to savor every moment they had left. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family, a smaller gathering than Natalie's birthday, but no less meaningful. Gold decorations, a special cake, and a renewal of their vows that left everyone in tears. 50 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams, Xavier said, his voice not as strong as it once was but still steady. Today, I renew that promise. For whatever time we have left, Natalie Morrison, you are mine and I am yours, until death parts us, and maybe not even then. Until death parts us, Natalie repeated, and not even then. I will love you in this life and whatever comes after. You are woven into my soul, Xavier. Inseparable and eternal. They kissed, and their family cheered, and Natalie felt a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. Joy for all they had shared, sorrow for the knowledge that their time together was growing short. 2 years later, Xavier died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83. Natalie woke to find him still beside her but gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she lay there holding his hand, memorizing his face, thanking him for everything he had given her. "You saved me," she whispered to him. "Not just that night in the blizzard, but every day since. You showed me what love was supposed to be. You gave me a family, a home, a life beyond my wildest dreams. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you for everything. Wait for me on the other side. I will find you again, I promise." The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over New Mexico to pay their respects. Xavier had been well loved in the community, respected as a fair and honest rancher, remembered for his kindness and integrity. But no one grieved as deeply as Natalie and their children. Grace held her mother throughout the service, both of them crying as the pastor spoke about Xavier's life, his love for his family, his dedication to his community. Thomas Xavier gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's wisdom and patience. Lily and James each shared memories that had everyone laughing through their tears. Natalie scattered Xavier's ashes on the spot by the creek where he had proposed, where they had spent their 10th anniversary, where so much of their love story had unfolded. As she released the ashes into the wind, she felt a strange sense of peace. Xavier was part of the land now, part of the ranch he had loved so much, forever connected to the place that had been their home. After Xavier's death, Natalie lived with James and his family in the main house, which felt both familiar and strange without Xavier in it. She spent her days much as she had before, sitting on the porch, working in the garden when she felt strong enough, playing with great-great-grandchildren who barely knew what to make of this ancient woman who was the matriarch of their family. But she was lonely in a way she had never been before. For 52 years, Xavier had been her constant companion, her partner, her love. Without him, she felt incomplete, like half of her was missing. She understood now why some couples died close together. When you had been two halves of one whole for so long, being separated was agony. Still, she persisted. She stayed for her children, her grandchildren, all the generations that had come from that frozen night when Xavier had found her. She told stories about Xavier to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, making sure the younger generations understood what kind of man he had been. On what would have been their 54th wedding anniversary, Natalie went to the creek alone. It was difficult at her age, but James walked with her partway and she managed the rest on her own. She sat under the cottonwood tree, now massive and old like her, and she talked to Xavier as if he were there. "I miss you," she said. "Every moment of every day I miss you. But I also carry you with me. In every sunset I watch, I feel you beside me. In every grandchild's laugh, I hear your joy. In every strong wind, I remember how you came to me through the blizzard. You are not gone, Xavier. Not really. You are part of everything I see and feel and experience. And soon enough, I will be with you again. She sat there until the sun set, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of all the sunsets she and Xavier had watched together. Then she made her way slowly back to the house, feeling tired but also strangely content. Natalie passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, at the age of 80. Her family gathered around her bed in her final hours, and she was conscious enough to see them all, to tell them she loved them, to assure them that she was ready. "I am going to be with your father," she told Grace, squeezing her daughter's hand weakly. "Finally going home." Grace was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded, understanding. As Natalie's eyes closed for the last time, her last thought was of Xavier. Of his face that first night when he pulled back the canvas of the wagon. Of his arms carrying her to safety. Of his voice promising that she would be all right. Of 52 years of love and partnership and devotion. She died with a smile on her face, and those who were there swore that in her final moments she looked young again, radiant and beautiful and filled with joy. At her funeral, Grace stood in front of a packed church and told the story one final time. The story of how her mother had delivered her alone in a frozen wagon, how Xavier Morrison had heard her cries and brought them both inside, and how that single act of compassion and bravery had led to a love story that had lasted over 5 decades and created a family that stretched across generations. "My mother survived the impossible," Grace concluded, her voice strong despite her tears. "And because she survived, because she chose to love again, because she and my father built something beautiful together, all of us are here. That is her legacy. Love and family and the courage to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. She taught us that, and we will pass it down to our children, and they will pass it down to theirs forever." Natalie was buried next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with a single large stone that read, "Xavier and Natalie Morrison, 2 halves of one soul, together forever." The ranch stayed in the family, passing from James to his children and eventually to his grandchildren. The house was preserved as much as possible, with the room where Xavier had first brought Natalie maintained almost as a shrine. The cottonwood tree by the creek became a gathering place for family celebrations, and it became tradition for newly engaged couples in the family to go there to propose, honoring the legacy of Xavier and Natalie. Grace lived to be 93, spending her final years telling stories about her parents to anyone who would listen. She wrote down everything she remembered, creating a detailed family history that ensured Xavier and Natalie's story would never be forgotten. Decades after their deaths, visitors to the ranch would still hear the story. The dramatic tale of survival and love, of a woman giving birth alone in the freezing cold, of a cowboy brave enough to ride into a blizzard, of 2 people finding each other at exactly the right moment and building something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The story became part of the local folklore, told in the town of Las Lunas, written about in historical accounts of the territory, remembered as an example of the resilience and romance of the Old West. But for the Morrison family, it was more than just a story. It was their foundation, their origin point, the reason they all existed. Every winter when the wind howled and the snow fell, the Morrison descendants would gather together and remember. They would remember Natalie's courage, Xavier's compassion, and the love that had overcome impossible odds. They would remember that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful futures. They would remember that choosing love, even when it seems too soon or too complicated or too scary, is always worth it. And on clear nights when the stars shone bright over the New Mexico prairie, it was said you could sometimes hear laughter drifting on the wind from the direction of the old Morrison Ranch. The spirits of Xavier and Natalie, still together, still in love, still watching over the family they had created from nothing but determination and devotion, and a cowboy's willingness to answer a woman's cry for help in the midst of a frozen storm. Their love story had ended, but their legacy lived on, generation after generation, proof that true love never really dies. It just transforms, spreading out like roots from a cottonwood tree, nourishing everything it touches, creating life and beauty and connection that lasts forever. And somewhere beyond the veil between worlds, Xavier and Natalie Morrison walked hand in hand through endless golden fields under perfect skies, their love eternal, their story complete, their happiness infinite and unending.